Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, welcome to week 4 of our study on the parables, these teachings of Jesus that, as we've talked about, are the definition of a parable, what it is. It's this way that Jesus taught, where he used this parable, a short story. The parable is a short story that illustrates a larger moral or spiritual lesson. And so far, we've covered in these first three weeks of this series, of this study, we've talked about the parable of last week. In week 3, we talked about the parable of the salt. In week 2, we talked about the parable of the two builders. And in the first week, we talked about the parable of the sower. Okay, and you can go back and check out the teachings on all three of those things, on our YouTube channel and online, and just check those out and follow with those. And I hope you're encouraged by those, and it draws you close to Jesus. But in week 4, what we're talking about is this. We're talking about this parable that Jesus teaches, called the parable of the light, parable of light. Okay, and this is from Matthew chapter 5. Verses 14 through 16, part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the largest sermon he ever taught. And let's go ahead and jump right into that. Check it out in Matthew chapter 5. Starting in verse 14, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father." And those are the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. And Jesus, in a similar way throughout the parables, describes us, his followers, describes believers in Jesus, Christians, in a peculiar way. He gives us a title of sorts that we don't at first understand. You know, he's called us sheep. He's talked about us as soil. He's talked about us as salt, as we discussed in week 3 last week. And all these ways, Jesus uses this thing to describe to us our position as followers and Christians in a different way. He wants us to understand more about what it means to be a believer and a follower of Jesus. And in week 4, in this parable of the light, it's no different. That Jesus is using this description as the light of the world to tell us something about ourselves as we follow Jesus. And that's my hope and prayer for you, that you are saying, I see what Jesus has done for me, and I believe in Jesus and I accept him. And before we jump right into this and get more into what Jesus is saying, we need to understand this, that in week 4 of this series, what we've talked about is that Jesus is the light, okay? As Jesus is the light of the world, and as we choose to follow him and become followers of Jesus and believers and Christians and children of God, the thing is that he makes us light. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus has called us the light of the world. In John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." He says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Okay, and that John chapter 8, verse 12, kind of sums up what is being said here in Matthew chapter 5 and in John chapter 1. That Jesus is the light of the world, but as we follow him, that light is going to flood into our lives, and it's going to eradicate darkness, and that we are going to be reflectors of that light. Okay, and the good news is this: that what John says in chapter 1. Of the Gospel of John is true, that the light overcomes the darkness, and the darkness is defeated. Okay, we know that as Christians, we believe that as Christians and followers of Jesus, that there will become a time when Jesus returns and eradicates darkness forever, that he wipes out pain, death, sadness, sorrow, and calls his children home to perfection with him for eternity. Okay, and we trust that light wins. We trust that light wins because we've seen Jesus overcome the darkness already by defeating death on the cross. Our big idea for tonight is this: that Jesus is the light of the world. If we follow him, we're to reflect that light into the darkness. Whoever you are watching this, if you're a middle school student, you're going to have dark days. If you're a high school student, you're going to face times where life's really tough. And I understand that. And Lord knows that we as adults, that there's some times where life's really hard and difficult and trials come and it feels really dark. And I pray that you're encouraged that Jesus, who is the light of the world, can bring light to that darkness. And I pray that as Christians follow Jesus, the light of the world, that we reflect him, that we are the light of the world to others around us who are struggling in darkness and struggling in hopelessness and with anxiety and stress and depression. And I pray that we, as Christians and followers of Jesus, bring light to the darkness. Okay, and as we get to that big idea, I want to go ahead and jump into some questions to consider tonight as we discuss ourselves as the light of the world. Okay, the point of Jesus being the light of the world is so that people can see him. The point of us reflecting Jesus is so that people can see him and what he can do in their lives. So my first question is, are you more worried about people seeing you or people seeing Jesus? In a world and culture and society where we're so focused on having perfect reputations and Instagram accounts and social media and Snapchats, and we're so focused on that, we want people to see the best light of us. My question is, are we so focused on ourselves that we want people to see us rather than see the one who gave up his life for us? It's a really important question. Who are you focused on people seeing? Yourself or Jesus? Okay. And one thing I want us to understand is this: that if you're a Christian today, I want you to ask yourself this question: when people look at you, do they see you as different than the rest of the world? When people look at your life, do they see that you are living in this world differently? Because the thing is that we live in a world where there's a lot of brokenness and there's a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, there's a lot of darkness. And if you and I are saying that we're following Jesus, the light of the world, our lives are going to look different. And I think that we have to ask ourselves at some point, does my life look different than the rest of the world? Does my life look different as a follower of Jesus? Okay? And if our goal as Christians is to reflect the light of the world, is to reflect Jesus into the darkness and take him out, I want us to ask ourselves this. Each of us has to ask ourselves, are there things that are keeping me from reflecting the light of Jesus? Are there things that are keeping you from letting your light shine? You know, there's an old Bible song that says, you know, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, I'm going to let it shine. And, you know, if you grew up in church, you know the song. Are there things that are keeping you from letting your light shine? Are there things that are keeping you from letting the light of Jesus shine through you? Because in a world where darkness tries to destroy every single one of us, it's so important to make sure that we let the light of Jesus shine so that people who are struggling and lost can find the light of Jesus and find the love of Christ so that they can have a relationship with God.